Jill Verdau, and I'm going to be showing you today how you can preserve some different nature things in epoxy. I like to preserve mushrooms and leaves and pine needles and pine cones and things like that. So I'm going to show you how you can find some of those today and the steps that you can take to preserve them and seal them up in epoxy and make jewelry or decor or anything like that. So first thing that we're going to do is we're going to walk over to my property. It's across the pond and it has a little walking path that my husband chopped through and made a nice little trail. So we're going to go on that and see if we can find some mushrooms. All right, here we go. All right, we're here. Come on in, let's see what we can find. All right, so one of the things that I really like to find and preserve are mushrooms. That's something that I really like because I think mushrooms are super cool and there are tons of varieties out in nature. So one of the ways that I look for mushrooms when I'm out here is I look for dead trees that are on the ground, that are in a wet environment like this. It just rained a ton the last few days. And I look for trees that are newly downed, so trees that could be down within the last year or so, because mushrooms really like that fresh dead tree to live off of. Mushrooms start as spores, which travel in the air, you really can't see them, and then they kind of implant in that tree and they feed off of the dead tree and become the mushroom, the visible mushroom that we see. So I'm going to go around, I'll show you a couple of places where I find mushrooms and then we'll get to preserving. Alright, it's a little difficult to see because it's really tiny, but there's a mushroom in here. I found it. See the top of it right there? Right, so I'm going to pick this little guy, and that's going to be perfect. That's one of the tiny little mushrooms that I like to put on little jewelry pieces or necklaces because I think they're really tiny and cute. So that's going to go in our bag, and we're moving. Alright, I just found a really cool mushroom, so check this one out. This one's huge. See my hand for size? That's a big one. So we're gonna pick that one. And it looks like it was actually already knocked down, maybe like by a deer or something. You can see the top was kind of eaten off. Again, maybe like by a deer or a squirrel, but that is a beautiful mushroom, so we're gonna take that with us. Now, one of the things, unfortunately this one was already knocked over, so it was kind of pulled out. But one of the things that's really great with sustainability for mushrooms to make sure that they can grow back again and again is you don't want to pull this bottom part off. So if you have a pocket knife or you just use your fingernail for small mushrooms, you can cut it before it hits the bottom here and you leave that bottom off. So the bottom would stay in the ground and then that's what produces more mushrooms. So we're going to take this with us. I also really like to preserve leaves, which is another really cool thing, especially right now during the fall when they're beautiful colors. So I found this cute little bunch. Looks like maybe a mini maple tree or something. So I found this cute one right here. Nice vibrant red. I'm gonna pick that. And I think maybe I'll go with this one too. That's really pretty. I'm gonna pick these two and we'll take them with us. Something that is really important, especially with sustainability and conservation, is not taking more than you need. I'm not going to pick a ton of mushrooms today because I want to make sure that those mushroom spores can stay in the wood and grow back next year. I'm not going to pick a bunch of leaves because I don't need all of those. I'm just going to pick a few. And usually I like to collect things that are already either dead or have moved on with their life cycle. So I like to only pick pine cones that are on the ground. And I like to only pick leaves, usually that are not on the big trees. And usually with mushrooms, I like to pick them towards the end of their life cycle. So it's a good way to be sustainable and conserve this beautiful nature that we've been given. And it's a great way to show honor and respect to your neighbors and to the earth and to those around you. So I think that's a really great way to make sure that you can enjoy the mushrooms and the nature in the future. Something really cool about mushrooms is that even if you don't specifically plant a seed or you buy the spores from the store, the mushrooms will show up. So this is a log that my husband chopped up because it was in the way when he was making the path. You can see here, this is where his axe went into the wood. There was a mushroom growing in there last week. There's a mushroom there, or a fungus. A few mushrooms here, see the orange? And then it looks like we have little friend growing underneath the leaves, and a different type of mushroom there. Right there, it's brown. So it's really cool that these just show up. Alright, we're at the other end of the trail. We're gonna head back to my house, and then I'll show you how we dry the mushrooms and dry the objects before we put them in the epoxy. Alright, here we go. For our workspace, we'll want to lay out wax paper and tape it down with scotch or packing tape. This is going to keep any epoxy or gross things off of your workspace. So now that we've laid out everything that we found outside, we're going to decide how we're going to dry the things and preserve them and get all the moisture out before we put them in the epoxy. Now some things, like leaves, don't have a ton of moisture, so they can be pressed in a book like this. So you can press them in an old college book, and then you can preserve them for maybe a week or so. And that's going to be enough time to get the moisture out. Things like wood, like birch bark, that can just kind of dry in a nice dry spot in your house, like maybe your basement or your garage, and then it'll dry out in a few days. But something like a mushroom, it has a lot of moisture in it. So there are a couple of different ways that you can dry the mushrooms before you put them in epoxy. One way, which is the most natural way, is just to lay them out on wax paper like this or an old cookie sheet and dry them in your garage or your basement or a mudroom, and they'll slowly dry over time and kind of look like, I don't know if you can see that, but this is a mushroom that I've coated in epoxy a little bit, and it's just kind of a wrinkled mushroom. If you want to really retain the color and you have an adult that can help you, there's this stuff called silica gel. And if you've ever bought a new pair of shoes or beef jerky, it's got those little packets in it that says do not eat. That absorbs moisture, and that's what this is. So by using gloves and working with a parent or an adult with you, you can dry out the items with the silica gel. And the way that you do that is you just put a layer of the beads at the bottom, the silica, then you put your item in, and then you cover it up to the top with the beads. And that will dry them either in the microwave for a few minutes, which again, work with an adult there, or it just dries over time for about a week or so. All right, so I've cleared my workspace of the things that we're going to dry and preserve. And now I've got some of the items, especially mushrooms, that I've already dried and are ready to be put in the epoxy. Now, the first thing I want to do before we start anything is take off any jewelry, watches, anything like that you don't want to get stuff on. Epoxy resin is something that's permanent. So again, this whole process should be done with adult supervision or just an adult doing most of this stuff. Epoxy resin is a type of material that it's a resin, so it's like a type of plastic, and there's the resin and then the catalyst. So the resin by itself, I've got the 2 bottles right here, the resin by itself doesn't solidify. The catalyst by itself doesn't solidify, but when you put them together, there's a chemical reaction, and that's what creates epoxy in the epoxy resin. Now here are just a couple examples of finished products with epoxy. I'll put actual pictures up so it's not so far away, but this is a butterfly in epoxy. This is a mushroom that I preserved and put in epoxy. You can see it there. And here's a shell that I found on the side of the lake, and I preserved it in epoxy. So it's super cool. It's a way that you can enjoy nature in your house, or you can give it to people as gifts or wear it as jewelry. And it's super exciting. It's a really cool way to be able to use nature after it's gone through its natural cycle, and you can preserve it and enjoy it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the GoPro down so you can see up close what I'm going to do, because I'm going to mix the 2 parts of epoxy. I wait a few minutes to get the bubbles out, and then we'll start pouring them into the molds. Now, the molds here, I put a fern in one just to set everything up and get everything ready. You can see the molds are like a flexible silicone. I've got a lot of different ones here. So this one's a half circle that I used for the snail shell. This one is a square, and I'm gonna put one of my mushrooms in that I've already coated with epoxy. And then I've got some that make earrings. I've got these make beads. So there's really cool molds. If you wanna spend all your allowance and all your hard-earned money, you can get a lot of different molds. So again, I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna bring the GoPro down and you can see what I'm gonna do, and then I'll go through the process. All right, so we're up close here and you can see some of the things I'm gonna put in epoxy before I mix it. I set everything into the molds and I get everything ready and plan it exactly right, because the epoxy solidifies within 30 minutes or so after mixing. So you wanna make sure that you've got everything set up. So today, I've got a rock here, a really cool green rock that I'm gonna put into this necklace pendant frame. This is a shell from a turtle that hatched in my driveway. I found the turtle nest after the turtles had hatched, and I saved the turtle shells, so that's dried and that's gonna go into the pendant. And then these little mushrooms here, I'm gonna put them inside this pendant to be a really cool design. I also have the fern, like I mentioned, that I'm gonna put in the epoxy. And then here's the mushroom. So this mushroom has gone through different layers of being coated in epoxy already. You can see it's kind of shiny. That's because I've already put it through epoxy a few times to get any bubbles, or to avoid getting bubbles and things. One of the things that you want to be careful with, like I said, is bubbles. I don't know if you can see, but there's a lot of tiny bubbles in here. That's something we want to avoid. So to do so, we've coated some things in epoxy already. Now, if you haven't had good luck and you didn't find any fun nature things, that's okay, don't fret. You can still put some really cool stuff in epoxy and it doesn't have to be from nature. So one of the things I'm gonna do today is take this gold glitter and I'm gonna stick it in one of these earring molds and make some really, really cool like disco earrings. So that's gonna go in there as well. So again, don't worry, you could put pretty much anything in epoxy as long as it's not currently living. So one of my goals in the future is I wanna make some pasta earrings. I think that would be pretty cool. so we finished our items. We've got the mushroom, the fern, the leaves, the birch, mushroom, shell, rock, and sparkles. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use a straw and I'm going to breathe hot air on the smaller pieces to get the bubbles out, and then I'm going to use my heat gun on these bigger pieces. Now if you don't have a heat gun, you can use a hair dryer, but you want to be careful that you don't blow dust onto the objects. So that's what I'm going to do now. That you could use too to get some of the bigger bubbles out is something that has a pointy end. So this is like a professional tool, but you can also use like a bobby pin or a sewing needle or something like that. So you could use it, and I can see there's a few bubbles here, so I'm just gonna poke those bubbles out and bring it to the top so they can pop. Again, I use the heat gun, but I like to use this little needle too. Alright, so here's our disco earrings. I got a little crazy, but when we take them out, they'll look great. There's our stone and our mushrooms and our turtle shell, and then our birch, our leaves, our fern, and then the mushroom. So these will all cure, but we got a lot of cool stuff going on here. All right, well, we have finished our project and we're gonna let it cure. Epoxy cures for about 4 to 6 hours initially, and then it fully cures at 48 hours. So in 48 hours, we're gonna check these guys out and hope that they are good. Enjoyed this tutorial. I know it was kind of quick and I didn't go through a ton of details, but if you have any questions, let me know. You can either comment here or we can chit chat in the Zoom. So again, I hope you enjoyed a quick tutorial on how to collect items out in nature, preserve them, and put them in epoxy resin. All right, bye guys.